My wife drove me to the hospital, left my wallet at the desk, and vanished for 5 days. When she finally came back, she didn't ask how I was. She asked if I was still alive. The nurse's answer wiped the color from her face. That's when I understood the accident was never an accident. My name is Curtis Davenport. I'm 58 years old. I've spent the last 22 years managing regional distribution networks for a food and consumer goods company that covers 4 Midwestern states. I know supply chains the way some men know their own backyards. Every route, every bottleneck, every weak link. I thought I knew my home the same way. I was wrong about that. Lorraine and I had been married for 26 years when it all fell apart. We had 2 kids together, or so I believed. Kyle, our oldest at 29, and Emma, 23, still finishing her graduate program in Columbus. I coached Kyle's Little League games, drove him to wrestling practice 3 mornings a week in high school, helped him move into his first apartment. I did all of it without a second thought, because that's what fathers do. The night it started, I was driving back from a supplier meeting in Cincinnati. Late November, sky already dark by 4:30, temperature dropping fast. I'd been on the road since 6 that morning, and I was tired, the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and makes the highway lights blur a little. About 40 miles outside of Dayton, I noticed the brake pedal felt soft. Not alarming, just slightly off, the way a bad feeling starts before you can name it. I touched the brakes going into a long downhill curve. The car slowed, but not the way it should have. I pressed harder. The pedal sank further than it was supposed to, and the car kept drifting. I steered into it, tried to use the shoulder, but the shoulder disappeared into a short embankment, and the car nosed down hard before I could correct. The airbag hit me like a wall. I heard the passenger window give way. Then silence. I woke up in a hospital bed in Dayton with 2 fractured ribs, a concussion, and a gash along my left temple that took 11 stitches. The room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. The chair beside my bed was empty. Nurse Elena Ruiz was the one who filled in what I couldn't remember. She was calm and professional about it, which somehow made it worse. "Your wife brought you in," Elena told me, checking my chart without looking up. "She left your wallet and insurance card at the admissions desk." I waited for the second part of that sentence. It didn't come. "When is she coming back?" I asked. Elena paused, just a beat, but I caught it. "She hasn't called to check on your status," she said carefully. "You've had no visitors." I figured there was an explanation. Lorraine hated hospitals. Always had. She'd waited in the car, both times her own mother had surgery. I told myself she was managing her anxiety, that she'd call soon, that she was probably just overwhelmed. I told myself a lot of things in those first few hours. By the second day, I asked to borrow a tablet to check work emails. That's when I found the first thing that didn't fit. A pending transfer request from our joint savings account, filed the morning after the accident. The listed reason was anticipated medical expenses. The amount was $40,000. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I found the second thing. A beneficiary update request on my life insurance policy, filed the same afternoon as the transfer. The policy was worth $900,000. I set the tablet down on the blanket and looked at the ceiling. My ribs ached every time I breathed. The chair beside me was still empty. I asked Elena for the hospital's phone. I called Nolan Barrett. He'd been my attorney for 16 years. Steady, careful, the kind of man who didn't alarm easily. When I told him what I'd found, he went quiet for a moment. "Don't touch anything," he said. "Don't respond to any messages. I'll be there by morning." I hung up and lay back against the pillow. Outside the window, the November sky had gone completely dark. 5 days would pass before Lorraine walked through that hospital door again. And when she did, it wasn't to ask how I was doing. Nolan Barrett arrived at 7:15 the next morning carrying a legal pad, a thermos of coffee, and the kind of measured calm that I'd always paid him for. He pulled the chair close to the bed, set his thermos on the windowsill, and listened without interrupting while I walked him through everything. The soft brake pedal, the accident, the empty chair, the transfer request, the beneficiary change. When I finished, he looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Who arranged the last service on your car?" he asked. "Lorraine," I said. "About 3 weeks ago. She said our regular shop was backed up, and she found somewhere with a winter special." "Did you see the receipt?" I hadn't. I'd been in the middle of a quarterly audit at work, and I let it go without thinking twice. Nolan wrote something down without commenting on that. I'm going to do 3 things this morning, he said. Freeze the pending transfer, flag the beneficiary amendment with the insurance carrier, and request the official accident report from the Highway Patrol. He paused. Do you have Derek Marsh's number still? Derek Marsh had worked investigations for the Ohio State Highway Patrol for 18 years before a knee injury pushed him into private work. He and I had known each other since our kids played on the same baseball team. I trusted him the way you trust someone who has never once given you a reason not to. I'll call him, I said. Nolan nodded. Good. Don't contact Lorraine directly. Don't respond to any messages from her. Let me be the channel. He left around 9. By noon, Derek had already driven down from Columbus. He sat in the same chair Nolan had used, drank the bad hospital coffee without complaining, and pulled up the accident report summary on his phone. No black ice reported on that stretch, he said. Weather was cold, but road conditions were rated clear. The patrol notes list brake system anomaly as the preliminary cause. Anomaly. I repeated. That's their word. It means they don't know yet whether it was wear or something else. Derek set the phone face down on his knee. Your car went to a private impound yard, not the insurance lot. I've already called. They still have it. I'm going to get someone out there today before anything gets processed or cleared. I asked him about the shop Lorraine had used for the service. He wrote the name down when I gave it to him. Hold Auto and Tire, over on Glenwood Avenue. I'd never heard of it before she mentioned it. Derek nodded slowly when I said the name. I'll look into it. That evening, after Derek had gone, the floor had gone quiet. My phone, retrieved from my jacket by a nurse who found it wedged under the seat in the impound paperwork, lit up with a message from Lorraine. People are starting to ask questions. We should talk before this gets out of hand. I read it twice. Not how are you? Not I'm sorry I wasn't there. Just damage control, dressed up in we language. I typed back slowly. Why did you change the beneficiary on my policy? The typing indicator appeared. Stopped. Started again. Then, I was thinking ahead. Medical bills can spiral. I was protecting our finances. Protecting our finances. The same phrase she used when she moved money between accounts without telling me. The same phrase she used to explain purchases I hadn't known about until the statement arrived. I put the phone down and stared at the water stain on the ceiling tile above my bed. On the 5th day, Elena stopped me in the hallway just before my afternoon check. She said a woman had come to the nurse's station a few minutes earlier, pressed coat, hair done, and asked a single question before heading down the corridor. Is he still here? Not how is he? Not can I see him? Just, is he still here? Elena said she told her yes, that I was stable and had been asking about her every day since I arrived. The woman went quiet for a moment. Then she walked toward my room. When Lorraine appeared in the doorway, her composure was intact, but something underneath it wasn't. She didn't come to the bed. She stopped at the threshold and scanned the room the way someone does when they're checking whether a situation has changed on them. I didn't know it was this bad, she said. You didn't call to find out, I replied. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Then, very quietly, almost as if she was asking herself rather than me, she said, How long have they been keeping you? I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about Elena telling me, no visitors, no calls. I thought about the beneficiary change filed while I was unconscious. I thought about the transfer request. Long enough, I said. Sit down, Lorraine. We need to talk. She stayed in the doorway. Lorraine never sat down. She stood in the doorway of my hospital room for about 2 minutes, answered nothing directly, and left when I told her I'd already spoken to my attorney. No argument, no tears, just a quiet recalibration behind her eyes, and then she was gone. That told me more than any conversation would have. Nolan arrived the next morning with Derek and a folder that was already thicker than I expected. The accident report is back, Nolan said, settling into the chair. Highway Patrol found no mechanical defect consistent with normal wear. The brake fluid reservoir showed signs of contamination, a substance introduced into the line that would degrade hydraulic pressure gradually under sustained use. I'll let that sit for a moment. Gradually, I said. Enough to feel slightly off on flat roads, Derek added. Enough to fail on a downhill curve at speed. Whoever did it knew what they were doing, or got advice from someone who did. Hold Auto and Tire, I said. Derek nodded. Liam Holt, 52 years old. Owns the shop outright. Filed for personal bankruptcy 14 months ago. Gambling debts, mostly. He's been making unusually large cash deposits since then. 6 of them in the past 4 months alone, ranging from $4,000 to $12,000 each. I thought about Lorraine handling the service appointment, about her not mentioning the shop's name until after it was done, about the receipt I never saw. Is there a connection between Holt and Lorraine? I asked. Derek looked at Nolan briefly, then back at me. We're still building that. But Holt's shop is 12 miles from our neighborhood. There's no logical reason she'd drive past for closer options to get there. Nolan placed a document on my blanket. I've also flagged a secondary credit line, opened in Lorraine's name 8 months ago. It wasn't tied to any joint account. She opened it independently. $43,000 drawn down over 7 months. The payments went to a Shell LLC registered in Indiana. I stared at the paper. She told me the spa membership went up. The spa membership is $40 a month, Nolan said evenly. I trusted her with everything. The accounts, the insurance, the routine maintenance on my car. Not because I was careless, because 26 years had built a kind of gravity between us that made suspicion feel disloyal. I was starting to understand how much that gravity had cost me. That afternoon, Derek called with something new. Liam Holt has a record, he said. Nothing violent. Financial fraud, 10 years ago. Insurance scheme involving a staged vehicle fire. Charges were reduced. He paid restitution, moved on. But here's the thing, Curtis. He didn't always live in Dayton. He lived in Cincinnati for 6 years before that. Same neighborhood as Lorraine's sister. Meaning he and Lorraine could have crossed paths years ago, I said. Meaning it's possible this isn't a random shop she found online, Derek replied. I hung up and laid back against the pillow. My ribs were still taped. The stitches along my temple pulled when I moved too quickly. But my thinking was clear, cleaner, in fact, than it had been in years. Because the fog that comes with trusting someone completely had finally lifted. Emma called that evening. She'd driven up from Columbus without telling me she was coming, and her voice came from the hallway before she appeared in the doorway. Sharp, tight with controlled worry. Dad, she said, crossing the room and squeezing my hand before she'd even taken her coat off. Why didn't you call me the second you woke up? I didn't want to pull you out of your program, I said. She gave me the look she'd been giving me since she was 16, the one that said she found my reasoning unconvincing. She sat on the edge of the bed and kept hold of my hand. Where's Mom? She asked. She came by once, I said. Didn't stay long. Emma was quiet for a moment. She called me 2 days after the accident, she said carefully. Not to tell me you were hurt. To ask if I knew whether you'd updated your will recently. The room went still. She asked you that, I said. I thought it was a strange way to process stress, Emma said. Now I'm thinking it wasn't stress at all. I looked at my daughter, 23 years old, steady and sharp, and felt something shift in my chest. She'd driven 3 hours on a weeknight because she knew something was wrong before I told her anything. That was Emma. Always had been. I need you to do something for me, I said. Don't tell your brother what's happening yet. She frowned slightly. Kyle? What? Just wait, I said. I'll explain when the time is right. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. She didn't push it. That was the thing about Emma. She knew when to trust that I had a reason. I was discharged on a Thursday morning. Nolan had arranged for me to stay at his guest house on the east side of Dayton rather than returning home. His reasoning was practical. If Lorraine was preparing any kind of legal maneuver around my mental state or capacity, being inside our shared property created complications I didn't need. I packed what the hospital had and left without calling her. Derek picked me up. We didn't talk much on the drive. He had the kind of quiet that meant he was working something through, and I'd known him long enough not to interrupt it. We were 15 minutes from Nolan's place when he spoke. Liam Holt and Lorraine have a history, he said. I got confirmation this morning. They were in a relationship for approximately 8 months, about 30 years ago, when Lorraine was living in Cincinnati before she moved to Dayton. They broke it off when she left. I watched the highway median pass. And Kyle is 29, I said. Yes, Derek said. Neither of us said anything else for a while. Nolan had the paperwork ready when we arrived. A DNA testing referral, already arranged through a private lab. Discreet, legally admissible, results within 5 business days. He explained it without any softening. If Kyle is not biologically yours, he said, it affects the estate picture significantly. Lorraine's attempt to shift assets and insurance designations takes on a different character if there's a pre-existing financial motive tied to paternity. She would have known, I said. Lorraine would have known from the beginning. Almost certainly, Nolan agreed. I thought about Kyle, 29 years old, working in commercial real estate in Columbus, always closer to Lorraine than to me. Not dramatically, just enough that I'd noticed and told myself it was personality. Some kids take after their mother. I hadn't looked deeper than that. What I hadn't let myself examine until now was the pattern of the past 3 weeks. Kyle had texted me the morning of my trip to Cincinnati, asking about my route, whether I was driving or flying, what time I expected to be back. I'd thought nothing of it. I thought nothing of most things Kyle asked because I had no reason to. I called him that evening from Nolan's landline. He picked up on the second ring. Dad. His voice was careful. Not warm, not cold, careful. I heard you were discharged. Word travels, I said. I need to see you, Kyle. This week. A pause. I've got a closing on Friday. Before Friday, I said. My tone left no room, and he heard it. He showed up the next afternoon. He sat across from me in Nolan's kitchen, jacket still on, hands folded on the table, the body language of someone who had rehearsed this and was hoping they wouldn't need to use the rehearsal. I didn't ease into it. I'd spent 29 years easing into things with Kyle. Did you tell your mother about my route the night of the accident? I asked. His jaw tightened. She asked. She worries about you driving late. She asked specifically about the route, I said. Not whether I was driving. The route. He looked at the table. Kyle. I waited until he looked up. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's been happening. What I want to know is how much of it you understood. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something I never quite heard from him before, something that sounded, for the first time, like honesty stripped of performance. I didn't know about the car, he said. I swear to you I didn't know about that. But you knew other things, I said. He didn't deny it. He looked at me with something complicated moving behind his eyes, guilt and calculation, and, underneath both of those, something that looked almost like relief at not having to hold it anymore. There's something else you need to know, he said quietly. About me. About who I am. He paused. I've known for 12 years. Mom told me when I was 17. She made me promise not to say anything. I held his gaze and kept my voice level. Say it, Kyle. He did. The DNA results came back on a Wednesday. Nolan called me at 7 in the morning, and the way he said my name before anything else told me what the answer was going to be. Not a match, he said. The lab ran it twice to confirm. Kyle is not your biological son. I was sitting at the kitchen table in Nolan's guest house with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Outside, the November sky was the color of old concrete. I didn't say anything for a moment. Not because I was surprised. I've been living with the probability for 4 days, but because knowing something in your gut and having a lab confirm it in writing are two entirely different experiences. One you can still argue yourself out of at 3 in the morning. The other you cannot. All right, I said finally. What does it change legally? Potentially quite a bit, Nolan said. Lorraine opened that secondary credit line and began moving money 8 months ago. The insurance amendment came 3 days after your accident. If we can establish that she had a financial motive predating the accident, specifically, a motive tied to concealing Kyle's paternity and protecting assets she'd been diverting, the picture shifts from opportunism to premeditation. She's been planning this, I said. The evidence suggests she's been positioning herself for some time, Nolan said carefully. Planning is a word for the courtroom. Right now, we build facts. Derek arrived at noon with 2 things, a coffee that was actually hot, and a name. Raymond Forsyth, 55 years old, regional sales director for a medical device company based in Indianapolis. Married to Nadine Forsyth for 19 years. 3 kids, all with Nadine. Currently living in a suburb of Indianapolis called Carmel, where the houses were large and the lawns were kept, and nothing about his life, from the outside, suggested that a paternity confirmation in an Ohio courtroom was about to rearrange it completely. He and Lorraine dated for approximately 10 months when they were both living in Cincinnati, Derek said. He relocated to Indianapolis for work. She stayed. They lost contact. He met Nadine about a year later. Derek set his coffee down. He has no idea. He's going to find out, I said. Yes, Derek said. The question is how. We agreed that Nolan would handle the legal notification, a formal letter, factual, and without accusation. Raymond Forsyth would receive confirmation that he was the biological father of a 29-year-old man named Kyle Davenport. and that this fact had been concealed from him since Kyle's birth by the child's mother. Nolan drafted it that afternoon with the precision of a man who had delivered difficult news before and understood that clarity was kinder than softening. The response came faster than I expected. Raymond Forsyth called Nolan's office the next morning. Nolan described the conversation to me afterward as controlled, a man working very hard to stay composed while the ground shifted under him. He asked 3 questions. Was the lab result admissible? Did the young man know? And did his wife know yet? The answer to all 3 was yes, no, and no. Nadine Forsyth found out the same afternoon. Nolan told me later that Raymond had called back a second time that evening, quieter, the composure harder to maintain, to say that Nadine was devastated and that their 2 youngest had overheard part of the conversation. An entire family in Indianapolis was now sitting with a truth that had been kept from them for 29 years. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I felt the weight of it, the collateral damage of Lorraine's choices radiating outward to people who had nothing to do with any of it. Meanwhile, Lorraine had not been idle. Emma called me that evening with an edge in her voice I recognized, the one she used when she was angry, but managing it carefully. Mom reached out to 3 of your colleagues today, Emma said. Harold Bennett, 2 others from the distribution board. She told them you've been struggling emotionally since the accident, and that she's concerned about your decision-making. She's building a narrative, I said. She's doing it fast, Emma said. I called Nolan immediately. He was unsurprised. She's seen the account freeze and the insurance flag, he said. She knows the ground is moving. This is the counter-move. Establish your instability before you can establish your conduct. What's our counter-move? I asked. The gala, Nolan said. The Dayton Business and Industry Forum held its annual dinner the following Friday. I'd attended every year for 11 years. Lorraine knew I'd been invited. She'd assumed, apparently, that a man with fractured ribs and fresh stitches would not show up. She assumed wrong. I called Judith Harrington that evening, 64 years old, chairwoman of the Forum's steering committee, a woman who had known me for 15 years and had never once struck me as someone who made judgments before she had all the information. I'll be there Friday, I told her. There are some things I'd like you to hear directly from me. I'll make time, Judith said, without hesitation. I put the phone down and looked at the cold November yard outside Nolan's window. Lorraine had spent 5 days telling people I wasn't stable. On Friday, I was going to walk into a room full of those people, stand up straight despite the taped ribs, and let them see exactly who was and wasn't holding it together. The forum was held at the Dayton Convention Center, a room that seated 300, ran on handshakes and business cards, and operated on the unspoken principle that reputation was currency. I'd built mine there over more than a decade. Lorraine had spent the past week trying to devalue it. Nolan drove. Derek came in his own car and positioned himself near the entrance, close enough to watch, far enough to avoid looking like a security detail. I wore a dark suit and moved carefully to protect the ribs, but I moved. No cane, no visible hesitation. The stitches near my temple had been removed 2 days earlier, leaving a thin scar that I didn't try to hide. We arrived 20 minutes before the main reception. Judith Harrington met us at the door. She'd reserved that time deliberately, I could tell, which meant she'd been thinking about this since my call. Curtis, she said, shaking my hand with both of hers. I'm glad you came. I needed to, I said. We stepped into a side room, off the main hall. Nolan laid the documents on the table in the order we'd agreed. Medical clearance first, then the flag insurance amendment, then the forensic preliminary from the brake fluid analysis. No accusations printed, just findings, dates, and sequences that told their own story to anyone paying attention. Judith read carefully. She didn't rush, which I respected. The beneficiary change was filed while you were unconscious, she said. 3 days after the accident, I confirmed. Not the first day. The third, as if someone needed time to assess whether a change was still necessary. Judith looked at the forensic note and the fluid analysis. Preliminary only, Nolan said. The investigation is ongoing. We're not making accusations this evening. We're establishing facts. Judith set the papers down and looked at me steadily. Harold Bennett told me Lorraine reached out to him this week. She said you'd been disoriented since the accident, and that she was exploring options to ensure your affairs were managed properly. I'm aware, I said. I told Harold I'd reserve judgment until I heard from you directly, Judith said. I'm glad I did. We moved into the main hall. I worked the room the way I'd always worked it, methodically, without rushing, shaking hands, asking questions, listening. Several people looked at the scar and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of courtesy. Harold Bennett found me near the bar and shook my hand with something that looked like relief, the expression of a man who'd been told one story and was now recalibrating. You look sharp, Curtis, he said. I feel sharp, I said. I always do when the facts are on my side. Lorraine arrived 40 minutes into the reception. She wore a deep green dress and entered with the composure of someone who had prepared for a room that did not include me. She saw me from across the hall, and the composure held, barely, for about 3 seconds, and then it adjusted into something more careful. She crossed toward me. I didn't move to meet her. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly, close enough that only I could hear it. You're still recovering. Medically cleared, I said. You'd know that if you'd called the hospital. Her jaw tightened. This isn't the place for whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything, Lorraine. I'm attending a dinner I've been to 11 years running. I kept my voice level and my expression even. The planning has been someone else's department lately. She looked at Nolan, who was standing 2 steps away, making polite conversation with a woman from the regional chamber. Then she looked back at me. You're making a mistake, she said. You're letting people who don't know our marriage push you into something you'll regret. Our marriage, I said, included a life insurance policy with my name on it and a beneficiary change filed while I was unconscious. If there's a mistake being made, I don't think I'm the one making it. Something shifted in her face. Not guilt. Lorraine was too controlled for guilt to show cleanly, but a recalculation. She reached past me to pick up a glass from the bar, buying herself 2 seconds. We can resolve this quietly, she said. We can have, I said. That window is closed. Judith materialized beside us with the timing of someone who had been watching from a distance. Lorraine, she said pleasantly, I've had a chance to review some documentation this evening. If you'd like to sit down together. I don't think that's necessary, Lorraine said. I think it may be, Judith replied, and the warmth in her voice had a very firm edge underneath it. Lorraine set her glass down. She straightened her shoulders, scanned the room once, measuring what she'd lost in the past 40 minutes, and walked toward the exit without another word. Derek appeared at my elbow as she pushed through the door. Her phone just connected to the venue's guest Wi-Fi, he said quietly. She's accessing something remotely. Let her, I said. Nolan's already changed every password she knew. Derek allowed himself a small nod. Smart. I turned back toward the room. 300 people, the hum of conversation, the particular energy of a professional community that was still, for the moment, intact. My ribs ached. The scar pulled slightly when I smiled. I smiled anyway. Lorraine didn't reach out after the gala. Not directly. Instead, she went quiet in the particular way of someone who is recalculating rather than retreating. No texts, no calls, no further outreach to my colleagues. Nolan said that kind of silence was usually more concerning than noise, and he was right. 4 days after the gala, she filed a formal request through her attorney to access our joint safe deposit box at First Federal on Wilmington Pike. The listed reason was retrieval of personal documents. Nolan caught it within the hour. She's looking for the original insurance policy documents, he said, and possibly the property deed. She's building a parallel case. If she can get physical copies of the originals before the digital records are fully locked, she has more to work with. Can she access the box? I asked. She's a joint holder, Nolan said. Legally, yes, unless we move first. He already had the paperwork in motion to reclassify the box contents as disputed assets under the pending legal proceedings. The bank put a hold on access by either party within 2 hours. Lorraine's attorney filed a complaint about the hold the next morning. Nolan responded with a 12-page document that outlined the forensic findings, the unauthorized financial transactions, and the timeline of the beneficiary amendment. The complaint was withdrawn by afternoon. That evening, Derek called. She was at your office building today, he said. Not inside. She doesn't have an active badge anymore. HR confirmed they deactivated her spousal access last week when Nolan requested it. But she was in the parking lot for about 40 minutes, sitting in her car. Watching, I said. And making calls, Derek said. I pulled the cell tower data through my contact at the carrier. She made 4 calls during that window. 3 to her attorney. One to a number registered to Liam Holt. That one landed differently. She's still in contact with him, I said. Active contact, Derek confirmed. Which matters because Holt's shop is currently under forensic review, and he knows it. If they're coordinating their story, we need that on record. Nolan escalated to Detective Alvarez at the Dayton PD the next morning. Alvarez was methodical and unimpressible in the way that good detectives tend to be. He didn't react to new information with urgency. He absorbed it and added it to a structure he was building at his own pace. He told Nolan that the cell contact between Lorraine and Holt was notable and that he'd be expanding the scope of his review. 2 days later, Lorraine made her last move. She showed up at my office building at 5:40 in the afternoon, just after most of the administrative staff had left, just before the cleaning crew arrived. She'd obtained a visitor's pass under the pretext of retrieving personal items she claimed to have left in my office during a visit the previous year. Reception called upstairs. I was at Nolan's, not in the building, but we'd set up the alert system 3 days earlier precisely for this situation. The building's upgraded cameras, Derek had arranged the upgrade quietly the week before, caught everything. Lorraine moved through the corridor with purpose, not haste. She sat at my desk, opened the laptop, and attempted a password reset through a linked email account she'd known about for years. The attempt triggered a silent notification to Nolan, who called Alvarez immediately. Alvarez and 2 officers arrived through the service entrance 11 minutes later. I watched the footage that evening on Derek's laptop. Lorraine was composed right up until the moment the office lights brightened and she heard footsteps in the hallway. She looked up, assessed, and made one last attempt at control, straightening her posture, folding her hands, preparing the explanation. It didn't work this time. Alvarez charged her with attempted unauthorized access to protective financial systems and obstruction of an ongoing forensic investigation. Her attorney arrived within the hour, and she was released pending a hearing. But the charges were on record, and the coordination with Holt was now part of the official file. Emma called me that night. She'd heard through a mutual friend that Lorraine had been at the office. Is she under arrest? Emma asked. Charged, I said. Released for now. But it's formal. Emma was quiet for a moment. How are you doing with all of this? It was the question I'd been deflecting for 3 weeks. From Derek, from Nolan, from well-meaning colleagues who shook my hand and looked at the scar and waited to see if I was holding together. I'd given everyone the same answer. Fine, managing, moving forward. Emma didn't accept that answer. She never had. I'm tired, I said. But I'm clear. That's what matters right now. That's enough, she said. For now, that's enough. I hung up and sat for a long time in the quiet of Nolan's guest house. 26 years. 2 kids, one mine, one not. A car service at the wrong shop by the wrong arrangement. And a woman I had trusted completely who had been running a parallel life inside our shared one for longer than I wanted to calculate. The tiredness was real. So was the clarity. The formal charges against Lorraine were filed on a Monday. By Wednesday, Liam Holt's attorney had contacted the district attorney's office. Holt wanted to talk. He'd been holding out for 3 weeks, banking on the forensic analysis being too preliminary to act on, and the financial trail being too fragmented to follow cleanly. Both of those assumptions had turned out to be wrong, and now he was sitting across from a fraud charge and a potential accessory charge related to the accident, and his attorney had done the math. Nolan walked me through what came out of Holt's statement that afternoon, sitting across from me at his kitchen table with the summary in front of him. Lorraine had approached Holt 8 months ago. They'd reconnected through a mutual contact from the Cincinnati years. Not a close friend, just someone who moved in overlapping circles and mentioned her name. She'd reached out under the pretense of getting a quote on brake service for her own car. The real conversation happened at the second meeting. She hadn't asked him to cause an accident. Holt was careful about that in his statement, lawyered up and precise. What she had asked him to do was service my car and ensure that the brake system would be, in his words, unreliable under sustained use. She told him I drove long distances regularly for work. She told him I often drove late at night on unfamiliar routes. She had not told him to cause a crash. She had simply created the conditions and left the outcome to probability. That distinction mattered legally. It mattered less to me personally. The money had come through the LLC. 4 payments over 3 months, routed carefully, totaling $38,000. Holt had cleared most of his gambling debt with it, and deposited the rest in a personal account he'd assumed was untraceable. Derek had traced it in 11 days. Holt agreed to full cooperation in exchange for a reduced charge, financial fraud with no accessory enhancement, provided his testimony was complete and consistent. Lorraine's attorney received notification that same afternoon. I was told she sat very still when she heard. Derek brought me one more piece of information that evening, something Holt had added at the end of his statement, apparently without prompting from his attorney. Lorraine had mentioned, during one of their planning conversations, that the life insurance policy was substantial and that my frequent travel created natural opportunities. She had described the situation, Holt said, as already heading toward an ending. I'd just like some say in the timing. I read that line twice. Already heading toward an ending. She had looked at 26 years of shared life and seen a timeline she was managing rather than a marriage she was in. I thought about all the evenings I come home from Cincinnati or Columbus or Cleveland, road-tired and hungry, and sat down to dinner across from a woman who had been running a completely different calculation since before I walked through the door. I didn't say anything to Derek for a long moment. She picked the wrong man to underestimate, Derek said finally. I looked at him. She picked the wrong mechanic, too. Derek allowed himself a small, dry smile. That, too. Kyle came to see me the following evening, unannounced, which was new. He'd always called ahead, always controlled the terms of our interactions. This time he just knocked on Nolan's door at 7 o'clock and stood on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and the particular expression of someone who has finally stopped rehearsing. I let him in. We sat in the kitchen. He didn't ask for coffee. He looked at the table for a long moment, then looked at me. Holt gave a statement. Kyle said, I know what's in it. Then you know what she was planning. I said, yes. He paused. I didn't know about the brake job. I want you to believe that. You've said that, I said. I'm still working on it. He nodded. He didn't push for more than that, which was the most honest thing he'd done since we'd started talking. Raymond Forsythe called me. Kyle said quietly. The DNA result. It reached him. I know, I said. My attorney sent the notification. Kyle looked at the table again. He wants to meet. He said he doesn't blame me. That none of it was my choice. I looked at my son, the man I had raised, regardless of what any lab said about shared biology. He was 30 years old, and he was sitting in a borrowed kitchen, trying to figure out who he was now that the story he'd been told about himself had come apart. I understood that feeling better than he probably knew. Meeting him is your decision, I said. I won't tell you what to do with that. He nodded slowly. I know. A pause. I'm sorry, Curtis, for the things I passed along. I didn't understand what she was doing with them. I looked at him for a long time. I believe he didn't know about the car, I said. The rest of it. We'll get there. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door left open, and that was more than I'd been certain I could offer him a week ago. The trial didn't drag on the way some people expected it to. Holt's testimony was clean, consistent, and corroborated by the forensic record. The financial documentation, the LLC payments, the secondary credit line, the timing of the beneficiary amendment, left no functional gap for the defense to work through. Lorraine's attorney attempted 3 different angles over 4 days, and Nolan addressed each one with the same quiet precision he brought to everything. On the 5th day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Lorraine was convicted on 2 counts of financial fraud, 1 count of conspiracy related to the brake tampering, and 1 count of obstruction. The judge sentenced her to 9 years. She stood at the defense table in a dark blazer and received the sentence the way she'd received everything in the past 2 months, with controlled composure that held until the bailiff moved toward her, and then fractured, finally, into something real and small and too late. Liam Holt was sentenced separately, 2 weeks later. Reduced charges, as agreed, 4 years, with possibility of parole after 30 months. He didn't look at anyone when the sentence was read. I wasn't in the courtroom for his proceeding. I didn't need to be. Raymond Forsythe had attended 1 day of Lorraine's trial, quietly, in the back row, with Nadine beside him. I nodded to him, once across the corridor during a recess. He nodded back. There was nothing comfortable in that exchange, but there was something honest. 2 men who had been handed the same deception from different angles, acknowledging each other without pretense. Nadine Forsythe had filed for a legal separation 2 weeks after the paternity disclosure. The last I heard, they were working through in private, which seemed like the right place for it. Emma was with me on the day of sentencing. She sat beside me in the courtroom gallery and didn't say much, which was what I needed. When it was over and we walked out into the December air, she put her arm through mine the way she used to when she was young, and we'd walk to the car after her school concerts. "What now?" she said. "Now we go forward," I said. Kyle had not attended the trial. He'd call me the evening before sentencing. A short call, careful, no performance left in it. "I can't sit in that room," he said. "I need you to know I understand why that's my problem, not yours." "It is your problem," I agreed. "But understanding it is the right place to start." He went quiet for a moment. "Raymond wants to meet next month." I said I'd think about it. "Then think about it," I said. "Take your time." We hadn't rebuilt anything yet between us. That was honest. What we had was an open line and a willingness to use it. And, after everything that had come apart, that felt like the correct foundation for whatever came next. I sold the house in February. It went quickly. The market was reasonable, and I didn't hold out for sentimental reasons I no longer had. I kept what was mine and divided the rest the way the court had outlined, which left Lorraine's share frozen in trust, pending the financial judgment against her. That number would follow her for a long time. I moved into a smaller place on the east side of Dayton, a house with a manageable yard and a porch that faced east, which meant good light in the mornings. I'd always been a morning person. I was still one. The utilities work continued. Judith Harrington had gone out of her way to ensure the distribution board understood that my professional record remained exactly what it had always been: 22 years of clean audits and reliable operations. I appreciated it without needing it. The work spoke for itself, the way it always had. 4 months after sentencing, I established a small fund through the Regional Food Bank, a distribution efficiency grant for nonprofit organizations working with limited logistics infrastructure. $20,000. Not a dramatic gesture, just a practical one, pointed in a direction that felt right. Emma drove up for the fund announcement. We had dinner afterward at a place on 5th Street that she'd found, and that turned out to be better than either of us expected. We talked for 3 hours, about her graduate work, about my plans, about the house, and what it had felt like to walk out of it for the last time. "Did you feel anything?" she asked. "When you left?" I thought about it honestly. "I felt lighter," I said, which surprised me a little. She nodded. "It shouldn't have." She was right about that. 8 months after sentencing, Kyle called on a Sunday evening. He'd met Raymond Forsythe the previous weekend, a lunch in Indianapolis, just the two of them, no attorneys. He described it the way you describe something that was harder and more necessary than you expected. "He's a decent man," Kyle said. "He doesn't know what to do with me yet. I don't know what to do with him. But we're both willing to find out." "That's as good a starting point as any," I said. He paused. "Are you and I a starting point?" I looked out the east-facing window. The evening light was going flat the way it does in late October, the yard going gray at the edges. "We're working on it," I said. "That's real. Don't ask for more than that right now." "I'm not," he said. When I hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of the new house. No traffic sound, no familiar creak of the old floorboards, no weight of 26 years pressing against every wall. Just the particular stillness of a space that was entirely mine now, shaped by nothing except what I'd chosen to bring into it. A man finds out who he is in the spaces between catastrophe and recovery, in the decisions he makes when nobody is watching, in the things he chooses to carry forward and the things he leaves at the door. I've been tested in ways I hadn't chosen and hadn't deserved. I'd come through it with my name intact, my record clean, and my eyes open in ways they hadn't been before. That was the real inventory. Not the house, not the accounts, not the insurance payout that had ultimately been redirected by court order. Just the man I still was when everything that had been built on false ground finally came down. I poured a glass of water, sat on the east-facing porch, and watched the last of the light leave the yard.